It has genuinely been years since we managed to get a hold of a 25p graphics card, but today, a good few years on, we've only gone and done just that. Now this here was purchased from CeX for 25p and is apparently going to be our new graphics card, and no, I couldn't quite believe it either, as it's been a good few years since these things have been available and they just show up randomly, so you've got to be paying attention. But after going through and ordering the card, I was amazed to see they actually dispatched it. I was expecting them to think it was a mistake and cancel it, but apparently they care so little, they just shipped it. And I mean, it's also a card that to my knowledge doesn't exist, as they never did a HD5850 with half a gig of memory. But then again, what exactly did they send us? Well, this here appears to be a HD5850, but whether or not it is actually this fabled 512MB of VRAM version, we'll have to find out, as someone appears to have damaged the label on the back of the card, which means some poor CeX employee probably just made a mistake, knew nothing about graphics cards, and just listed it as he got told it was. I can imagine the conversation probably went, what card is this? And he was like, I think it's a 5850, it's probably got half a gig of VRAM. He was like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna put that on the system now. Yeah, we'll give you like 2p for it. I'd have no idea how much they even offer for something like this, or maybe they just found it at the back of the shop. Either way, we got it for next to nothing. But then again, when something this strange happens, you always have to find out if it actually works. Right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to take out this RTX graphics card, which shouldn't be too difficult to do. I want to say this is a 4060 or something along those lines. It's whatever it is, it's from Palette, the legendary makers of Frobot the Robot. And we'll put that to one side for now. And then where I put it down, I've put down the Radeon HD58 something or other. We have to find out exactly what it is because the label is peeled off on the back, as I've probably already shown. So if we get that put in here, it needs two 8-pins? Two 6-pin connectors. Ooh, this is getting a bit cramped for space. Right, only need that 6-pin. And then what we want to do is move that away from the fans there. And take out the phone I was using for lighting. Right, that's all plugged in, that should be working. What I'll do, we'll move the camera out, we'll see if it turns on. Okay, so we've moved the camera out a little bit. What we're going to do next is turn this on and see if we get a display output. I think the fans have come on. If they have, they're very quiet, which is a nice change from last week's video on the 2900 XT, where you could immediately tell that turn on. Oh, we've got a post screen, we've got Asus, and that looks like we've got a working 25p graphics card. So why don't we get this all turned on and find out what have they actually sent us, and why do they say 512MB? Because to my knowledge, that card doesn't exist. Let's find out. From the looks of things though, this is a working Radeon HD5850, and after booting the card into Windows, it looks like there isn't even anything wrong with it. In GPU-Z, it was recognised as having a full set of memory, and as we were trying to look at things, in a stark change of things from last week, Windows 10 actually downloaded and installed working drivers. A genuinely complete change of events from last week where it was hours of trying to get them to work. This thing just booted up and decided, yep, gonna have some drivers, worked absolutely fine through the Windows 10 ones, and I just wanted to make sure nothing strange was going on and it wasn't going to crash out, and the only benchmark I had on hand was the original Crysis GPU benchmark loop. So I left it running for a while, and to my surprise we saw 1, some blisteringly high frame rates because I had no clue what settings it was running at, and 2, it didn't crash. Still, we need to actually get some real drivers on here, as the included ones with Windows 10's downloader okay at best, so I went straight to the AMD website and left those to download. Now, while those are downloading really quick, I am going to briefly cover what exactly is the Radeon 5850. Released in 2009, this was one of the most formidable DirectX 11 cards around, cut down from the most powerful single card on the market, AMD's HD5870, and while performance suffered around 10 to 15%, the price on these was slashed more than around 30%, quickly dropping to 40% in the coming months. You nearly had the highest end performance without any of the cost. It knocked Nvidia's GTX 285 off into irrelevance, while being faster and cheaper, while also having full DirectX 11 support. This card was seriously something to reckon with. The only solution from the competition would have been to cut the price of the flagships, which would have meant knocking down every other segment, which didn't happen, meaning that if you wanted a graphics card, you wanted a HD5850. Reviewers praised it everywhere, and even some of my mates ended up using a 5850 without having a single problem whatsoever. And in many ways, this was the card that continued to save AMD. But just how much power is in a Radeon HD5850? Now approaching in on 15 years old, the HD5850 does boast some really impressive specs to match up with the history that goes with it. It wasn't the highest end card on sale at the time, but still features a Cypress Pro GPU based on the Terascale 2 architecture and was packed full of power. 1,440 cores, 72 TMUs, 32 ROPs, combined with 1GB of GDDR5 memory, despite what CeX told us it was, and operates with a rather respectable 256-bit memory bus. Still more than some RTX cards, I will always be mentioning that. It uses around 132 watts under peak load when running intensive tasks, and sells for 25p over on CeX, which is exceptionally cheap. In terms of other marketplaces, these things go for under, £7 over on eBay. No one is bidding on these. So no matter where you're looking, you can find these things for next to nothing. Right, so in terms of overall condition, I'm actually really impressed. Outside the scuffed sticker on the back, which is clearly where the misnaming's come from, I don't even think they tested this thing. This thing's been running really well. I mean, even though I've only tested it briefly with a Crysis benchmark, it was running about 60 degrees. So I'm actually quite curious what the condition is underneath, the shroud. So what we'll do, we'll take off the cooler and we'll see, does this thing even need new thermal paste? Because honestly, I don't think it does. Let's have a little look. If we go for a, I don't know, somewhat large Phillips screwdriver, that looks about right. I think that's the same size one we used on the 2900 XT last week. We can have a little look. Nope, need a smaller one than that. And this is how so many of these get stripped. People not using the right screwdriver. Right, let's get this off now. Thankfully only 4 screws, which makes our life 10 times easier than last week's one, where we had about 13 or so, 2 of which was stripped completely. So we should just need to get these off, and then I reckon we're all good. I don't know if it's meant to have screws there. No, I don't think it is, but it has got 2 holes there for screws which aren't there, which is an interesting one. So why don't we have a little look at what's happening under here. Right, turn that over, take that off, and it's perfect. Honestly, that thermal paste still looks absolutely fine, and yeah, someone really looked after this card before they traded it in. I don't know if you can still see, that thermal paste is still slightly wet around the corners. So this thing wasn't repasted that long ago. It's got a bit of dust on it, but a bit of dust on the, memory's not going to hurt anything. This is an absolute steal. And a really nice cooler design. So, I suppose from there, we'd probably better carry on with the rest of the video. Overall then, things are off to a brilliant start. The drivers are downloaded successfully off the AMD website, the card appears to be in brilliant condition, and the only issue I've got so far is the final drivers do appear to be beta drivers, which I think is version 16.4, which means we do get the still very fresh looking Crimson overlay, as opposed to the older Catalyst one, and, they did work straight out of the box. I can't really argue. I know they're beta drivers, but even then, there was no issues running it through the capture card, and it was perfect with resolution changes, and everything here was working. So all that was really left to do was plug in the SSD full of games, and get started with what really matters here, the benchmarks. Starting us off with something very impressive, we have Black Mesa running here in 1080p with high settings, and first off the game experienced no random crashes, something that apparently this game exhibits more than I actually thought. It was remarkably stable here though, and more than that, it looked and ran brilliantly, returning 65 FPS on average. This of course was far higher during certain areas of the game where you're inside and could be in well excess of 100 FPS, something I really didn't expect to see on a graphics card this cheap, and from years before this game even came out. Even areas outside of combat worked fine, you know, those sort of larger open areas, but you would sort of see closer to that 65 FPS average. But still, overall, brilliant, doesn't matter what you did in this game, perfectly playable frame rate and great graphics. BeamNG started off fairly solid. With a lot of the simpler maps, the card managed the game in 720p with a combination of both medium and high settings. We saw near enough 60 FPS in the most simple of maps, and only a small amount less where the intensity increased a little bit, like our usual driving something off a cliff benchmark, and it wasn't bad for a game that can be notoriously hard to run. However, there are certain areas of the game which leap in intensity, reducing the game down to around 15 FPS if you wanted to keep the settings all the way whacked up. If you did go through though and reduce them down to a mixture of low settings, we did claw back a good chunk of the frame rate. Still lower than I'd like, but definitely playable, as you know, these maps are exceptionally intensive. We carried on for a good while and still returned a perfectly solid 34 FPS in the most intensive scenarios. So overall, depending on what you're doing, high settings or low settings, still playable on a 25p graphics card. Not something I thought I'd be saying today. City Skylines here, which as we know can be rather intensive for a city builder, especially the one that has roots in the Unity engine. Still, in the 900p resolution with higher settings, we had absolutely no issues returning a very smooth 46 FPS average. Absolutely fine for a slower paced game, where I'd rather watch my city grow with some decent level of details than have a blisteringly fast frame rate. I know there's those people out there that can't play this game at under 100 FPS, but at that point, you're watching a glorified traffic simulator at a high frame rate. I want to watch my cities grow, you know? Something nice there. There could of course be dips overall where the card, you know, didn't have optimizations for the game, and the late game could prove a tad more intensive, but that's due to our limited VRAM. Overall though, it was never unplayable. Now this one did impress me a lot. For a game that is notoriously awful to run even on the latest and greatest of PCs, we have GTA 4 running here with high settings in full HD 1080p with no frame rate issues. The game ran dead smooth with 55 FPS on average, and I know that the game does perform better on older cards, but this was not something I was expecting here. Last week's 2900 XT needed a 30 FPS cap to be remotely playable, but here on the 5850, perfect performance, great visuals, amazing frame times, and an experience that modern cards can't match. We were doing this for 25p, and there's modern cards out here that can't manage this game. This is ridiculously impressive. Counter-Strike 2 was by no means unplayable, but did feel oddly sluggish for a game returning a 76 FPS average. Everything just felt heavy, you know, just like it's got a bit of weight to it and I'm chucking it around. Now, I don't have a great deal of experience in this game. You know, older CSGO, played it tons, but the responsiveness here just didn't feel as quick as when I've tested similar cards on CSGO, but it's 2024 and this is the current benchmark. It certainly wasn't a problem, the game looked good with competitive settings, however it is notoriously a bit of a pain to benchmark this game, so I was relying on the built-in benchmark from the workshop and a bit of casual gameplay. So, you know, the frame rate could go up in competitive scenarios, but only slightly. Overall, not a bad experience and is perfectly playable on a 25p graphics card. I think I'm just being a bit critical here because everything felt slow. Like I'm moving the mouse around and it feels like it's dragging a little bit, but I don't know if that's a fault with the game, or you know, maybe we're just expecting too much from a 25p graphics card. Overall, not bad. The Elder Scrolls Skyrim is probably the perfect example of just how powerful this card was. You know, in the era of the Xbox 360 being king, well, this thing knocks it off the top spot just a tad, with Skyrim running here in full HD 1080p at a flawless 60 FPS. And this didn't change no matter what you were getting up to, the card still had plenty in reserve, which meant if you wanted to find some of those original graphics mods which were targeting cards just like this, you've got great performance here and you could likely see it look even better with some mods. And just in case that wasn't impressive enough, let's move things up a generation with Skyrim Anniversary. Booted up with the exact same settings. Admittedly, we only saw half the frame rate, but still a perfectly acceptable 30 FPS in a game designed for a completely different set of consoles. So in our budget context, the latest version of Skyrim runs with high settings, full HD and a perfectly smooth frame rate. Absolutely unbelievable. Last time we had a 25p graphics card on the channel, we only ever managed Skyrim, the original release, in 480p. So I have no words for how impressive this is. GTA 5 ran perfectly fine with 1080p and higher settings. There was still a little bit of the usual terascale related hitching in places, but very, very minor, and was heavily linked to GPU utilization up there in the top left. Overall though, it looked absolutely fantastic with predominantly higher settings used in a nice full HD resolution, and I wasn't expecting things to be this smooth in the slightest. But there we have it, GTA 5 actually running on a cheap graphics card. But I know a lot of you want to know how the card fares in GTA Online, and the answer is, as always, better than it did in single player. Once again, the game's netcode only breaks over 16 players, so provided you're under that, you will see perfectly fine performance. After 16 players, good luck, even NASA would struggle. But there we have it. There was none of the terascale related hitching at all, and the game could certainly see 60 FPS when out of towns or cities, and it didn't drop down too badly when streaming in tons of detail flying across the city either. Overall, a great success for GTA there. Bannerlord ran beautifully in 720p with medium settings. This was the preset the game defaulted to originally, but we did have to drop the resolution down to something a tad more manageable. Still, smaller battles in a lot of the early to mid game, you could see FPS in well excess of 50 to 60. However, in our big benchmark battle, the game did average closer to 30 FPS a lot of the time. It was in the higher 30s and was still a very playable experience, and a blind sight better than the console version of this game, which suffered with being far more sluggish, with worse frame drops, worse graphics, and overall just feel like there's this weird level of input latency that wasn't even present here when we were only seeing high 30s in terms of FPS. So overall, Bannerlord ran brilliantly. Unfortunately, probably our most disappointing result of the night was Fallout 4, a game that I still find runs particularly awfully, but one that people are desperate to play after the release of the show. Still, with medium settings and a 900p resolution, the game was quite playable, and didn't actually look too bad when you were out in the wastelands, but those larger built-up areas, well, I just think they didn't look great and they didn't run particularly well either. They were not unplayable by any means, but after how well everything else did on the card, it was a tad disappointing, and the frame drops could be rather bad. The sun also looked really off. I don't know if it's the god rays just not liking the card, and honestly I would have been better off turning them off because they look just really pixelated and nasty. More of a distraction than a graphical option, so not ideal, but still an experience you can work around. But finally, can it run Crysis? Well, of course, with 900p and high settings across the board, the game ran beautifully. We saw an impressive 72 FPS during our usual benchmark, and it's just amazing to see this card running this game that well. We rarely ever see new cards. Well, I say new cards, when we test something new it's probably very low end, so that's probably why. But still, we don't often see cards run the game this well, yet alone when they cost us just 25p. This may actually be the best deal the channel has seen for a while, and goes to show that 25p graphics cards, you know, a lot has changed in not a great deal of time, because we could hardly run this before, and now we're seeing it in like this. It's amazing. So yeah, every benchmark we threw at the card seemed to work, and there were some notable areas where the card struggled, but the VRAM wasn't too much of an issue. I know there'll be plenty of people saying 1GB of VRAM, that's not enough. Well, you know, when your card only has this much power, it's all it needs to actually shine through and show off that this is not only a good value card, but AMD got things right here. And compared to the last 25p GPU we had, which was an NVIDIA unit, I want to say it was an 8600 GT, we are seeing double the frame rates, higher resolution, and, you know, higher settings. It's amazing. Everything is better here. and as it stands, at the moment, everything was very smooth on the card. There were no crashes, but really what I wanted to see was, can we push things even further with a little bit of an overclock and maybe some custom drivers, just to see how much more can we get out of a 25p card. First things first, we did want to see just how much we could overclock the card. Our unit wasn't amazing, but we did still manage to see some fairly decent performance overall, which of course I have recorded entirely for you. Right, so you join me here with the Radeon HD5850 in the PC. I've got the Unigine Valley benchmark running here, and the idea is we're going to see how much more performance we can get out of this. So what I'm going to start by doing is, have we got power limit controls at all in here? I'm just having a little look through and see what options we've got. Not many, actually. Do we have any more in MSI Afterburner? Let me see, where is Afterburner? I have to open it via this shortcut. Do we have power limit controls? Not from the looks of things. Have we got any other options in here? Unlock voltage control? Maybe. Let's see if that works. We'll see if it works. Extend official overclocking limits. Let's have a little go applying those. And we'll restart the PC and reconvene in a second, see if there's any way we can get this thing overclocking. Right, so you join us back here on the Windows desktop, and we're going to go straight back into not launching Teams, because apparently Windows 10 makes everything start. Still, not as bad as Windows 11. We're going to launch up Unigine again, keep that running over in the corner, and we are going to relaunch MSI Afterburner and see if it's going to give us any more shortcuts. I don't think it will, but you never know. Let's try and get all of that visible on screen. Lovely. And what do we have here? Do we have any additional options? No, unfortunately not. Well, it's not too bad. I mean, I wasn't really planning on using MSI Afterburner in the first place. It did make Windows start with sort of a pinkish screen earlier, but that's not the end of the world. What we'll do is we'll just use the Radeon global settings and see if we can, eke out a little bit more performance out of this thing. So if we start with the GPU clocks, see if we can push 800 megahertz. No. Are we up to 800? We are up to 800 megahertz on the GPU core, and slightly more frames there. Can we try 850? We are now running 850 megahertz, 99% utilization, and it hasn't immediately crashed. Can we go for 900? I mean, if we could push a gigahertz, that'd be very impressive. 900, and still no issues here. This is getting very impressive. Right, let's see if we can do 1000. No, that's our limit there. 1000 is not going to be happening. That's going to crash out. And then we'll restart and find somewhere between 900 and 1000 that seems to be our sort of overclocking level. I mean, how's the card doing for temperatures? Absolutely fine. This thing has just not got warm once. Can we close this down, please? There we go. And let us go back to, say, 900, which we knew was stable. We're feeling optimistic. We'll do 925. Relaunch that, drag it back into the corner, and then we shall see. Are we getting any immediate crashing? We're not getting any artifacting, which is nice. Oh, he says, don't click on it. It has broken it. So yeah, 925, still too high. Right, what if we try and do just, 900 quickly before that launches. Speed overclocking, apply that. Don't crash, please. Okay, 900. 900 on core seems to be our limit. How far can we go on memory? We up to 1100? How's 1100 looking? 1100 is stable. Can we do 1150? 1150 also stable. This is overclocking really well. This is a nice change from the 2900 last week. Right. 1200. Can we push 13? I'm feeling that's a bit optimistic. Oh. No, 13. Not happy. Let's drop back. We might be a bit late dropping back. 1285 still unstable. 1250 perhaps. 1250. 1250 is stable. That's a pretty good overclock going on right there, and given that we can't seem to change many of the other settings, we're doing alright. It's not getting hot either, this graphics card, not getting hot at all. So what we'll do is we will rerun some synthetic benchmarks and then some games, and we'll see what kind of performance we get out of that. This is brilliant because I could hardly hear myself over the graphics card last week when I was trying to do a live segment, and suddenly you can hear everything I'm trying to say while we're overclocking. This is a really, really good card. This might be possibly the best bargain we've ever had on the channel. However, when we turned to custom drivers, we didn't have a good time. Now, I was expecting big things here, because, you know, last time I tested these was with the later AMD 7000 series of cards, and one of the main things I wanted to test was Counter-Strike 2, and given how well I'd seen them perform previously, you know, I was expecting big things. But we quickly ran into issues where games that would have received the most improvement would simply crash due to a conflict with their anti-cheat, so a bit of a shame there. Unfortunately, Counter-Strike 2 has a form of anti-cheat that does not like modded drivers, so that was one I was really hoping we'd get a bit of a better experience in, yet it just crashes down to a small window and there's not much we can really do about it, so I'm going to end task there because it is majorly slowing down the system. But what we will do is we will try GTA 5 next to get an idea of, with an overclock and you know, some modded drivers, does it improve performance a little bit? So we'll let that load up and we'll find out very quickly, does this fix our performance woes? Not that they were too bad in the first place. All of that was shit. Right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to see if the modded drivers and an overclock fixes performance. We did try and test Counter-Strike 2, but unfortunately with modded drivers the anti-cheat won't let you launch it. Counter-Strike Go used to be fine with things like that, modded drivers never ran into problems there, but unfortunately looks like CS2's cracked down on those types of things. But we're running the Nemes drivers here, and we're running the same overclock we were before, so what we're going to do now is let the game load up, and crash. I'm assuming we might have to dial our overclock back there a little bit, which is weird because it was stable through the benchmarks. We'll knock 100 megahertz off the memory speed because that's looking an awful lot like memory corruption, and we'll go from there. Honestly, the performance we had was pretty decent. Oh, but we completely locked up. Oh yeah, we've crashed. Right, we'll restart the PC. There's a restart button somewhere. There we are. And we'll turn down some of those clocks, and then we'll jump right back into things. Right, so the Nemes drivers here don't appear to be all too stable, given that I don't think it was the overclock that was causing the crashing. I think it might be the drivers, which is odd. Usually I have such great experiences with these drivers, but it could just be that Terascale and these modded drivers, it is very system dependent. You know, I've had issues before where, you know, sometimes the drivers work, sometimes the modded ones don't. So we'll dial it back to the drivers we were using, and then we'll test some games with just the standard overclock, and we'll see if that improves performance somewhat there, because this card is not liking these drivers. Usually it should be fine. You know, I've done a complete DDU and uninstall of the originals. I've gone through and just installed the standard modded driver package. It should all work fine, but we're just getting sort of this mess happening here now, where we're not even running an overclock, but it's not even loading the settings menu. So, oh, or is it? We have a little opaque blur going on. Yeah, what we'll do is we'll go back to the standard drivers and we will test them from there. So, unfortunately, modded drivers, not a great deal of success here on this card. Could be down to a lot of things, but it could just be a case of sometimes they can be 50-50, and in this instance, modded drivers are not going to be the solution. Right, so we're now running with our overclock in place, and things are noticeably smoother, he says, as there is a small spike in the frame rate, but we're now seeing much closer to a solid 60 FPS in GTA 5 with the same settings. And this is from going into MSI Afterburner, extending the overclock limits, and then going back into the AMD drivers to actually, you know, increase the clocks on core and memory. And we're still not seeing full utilization when driving around in single player, which is an issue inherent to terascale cards from something I've noticed, and something that online seems to resolve. But we are still seeing a slightly smoother experience overall. Now, overclocking is not going to save everything here. As we can see, the memory up in the top is spiking very close to the VRAM limit, which could be one of the reasons that our memory, is limiting the full utilization of the card here. But generally, the game is running smoother. It feels smoother to play overall. There's still small hitches here and there, but ultimately it does look really nice with the high settings enabled, and we are still seeing anywhere between 40 to 60 FPS. The main times we're dipping down to 40 is that utilization though. I mean, you can watch the numbers in the top left hand side, and as you can see, it's just so sporadic. I mean, as you see, 92% utilization here, well over 60 FPS, yet when a lot is about to be going on, we will drop down further than that. I mean, now we're hitting 70 FPS. It's the utilization of the card here that struggles. And overclocking does help because it means that even at lower utilizations, the card does have a bit more performance to it. So with terascale, overclocking isn't going to help you all the time. But in those situations where, the card isn't receiving proper utilization, it does certainly help bring up that deficit. And as I'm noticing now the memory usage has gone down, our utilization is back up to 100%. So I am going to say there is definitely something funky going on with the VRAM here, given that, this doesn't tend to happen on equivalent NVIDIA cards. I'm not too sure why. Could just be another funky terascale thing, but ultimately this is still a pretty good experience. I'd be inclined to say it's entirely down to the VRAM, but the thing is, when we go online, we see perfect utilization more of the time, whereas here, it just doesn't happen. So overall, it does make games smoother with the overclock, but it's not exactly going to save everything. But you will still see a smoother experience. It's just a shame we couldn't pair this with some modded drivers and see if they helped out even more. And it's just crashed. So also don't overclock it too much, because apparently we might have pushed it a little bit too far. I did try putting it up 50 MHz more on the memory, so yeah, we'll stick to the old limit before, but still, overall, a good experience. So there we have it, a 25p graphics card, the concept that actually started this channel now brought back to life, and things have come a long way. They were by no means perfect, especially when we started pushing things a little bit too far, but when you are spending so little, can you really complain that you can't push things further? For such a little price, the card turned up in amazing condition, worked beautifully, didn't get hot at all, was dead silent while running, and despite my absolute detest for the terascale series of drivers, these final beta ones do work surprisingly well. Yes, they were abandoned on a beta driver, and the NVIDIA Fermi series has aged better, but at least these ones install fine, and for the most part they do the job, so I can't complain too much, especially when this is the price we're paying. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and just seeing how much 25p actually gets you now. So go out, grab one of these cards, they are brilliant value, and thank you very much for watching. Good night.